say goodbye when she was in intensive care. Shortly after she passed away, one thing I will never forget is, due to my age, I never saw her or got to say my goodbyes.
Mrs. Sturgess, thank you very much.
Okay.
Not easy. I'll rise for 5 minutes just to allow people to rearrange themselves.
All right.
Miss Whitelaw.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, Deputy Chief Constable. My name's Francesca Whitelaw, and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Could you give us your full name, please?
It's Paul Mills.
And you've made 3...
Has the gentleman been sworn, Miss
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr. Mills. Stand or sit according to
Thank you, sir.
comfort.
Thank you. You've made 3 witness statements for the inquiry. You should have a copy of those witness statements in front of you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for making those witness statements and for attending today to give evidence. Could we just look at those witness statements in turn? Firstly, your core witness statement, extending to some 235 pages, is dated the 13th of October 2024. Sir, it's tab 5 in your witness bundle.
I have it, thank you.
For the transcript, the reference is INQ 006090. On page 235, the last page, is there a signature?
I'll just turn to that. Yes, there is.
And is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And are the contents of that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
The next statement, a supplementary statement of 16 pages, is dated the 11th of October 2024. The reference for the inquiry is INQ 006091, and so it's tab 6 in your witness bundle.
Tab 6 or tab 7?
That one should be tab 6, and there's a third witness statement at tab 7.
Yes, that's fine, although 7 seems to bear the date 11th of October. Perhaps they both do.
It does indeed. They
Right.
both are
Thank you
dated
very
11th
much.
of October. Could you just confirm that that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and
I
belief?
can just get the copy I've got in front of me isn't signed, but I can confirm that I have signed that statement.
And that the contents are true?
Yes, and the contents is true.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, given the length of your core statement, you have prepared an overview summary statement of some 44 pages, which is at tab 7, sir,
Yes.
again dated the 11th of October, and the inquiry reference is INQ 006117. Is there a signature on that one on page 44?
Yes, there is.
And is that your signature?
Yes, it is.
And can you confirm that the contents are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I can confirm that.
Thank you very much. Deputy Chief Constable, this morning you're giving introductory evidence about your role in Wiltshire Police and their involvement in the events of 2018, which is going to be drawn primarily from your summary statement, but you're due to return to give evidence later in the week to give more detailed factual evidence about Wiltshire Police's response to the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley. Sir, given this, with your permission, the inquiry intends to publish the supplementary statement of DTC Mills after his evidence on Thursday.
Yes, I'm sure that's helpful.
Thank you. So to begin, could you tell us your current role, please?
Yes, I'm currently one of 2 Deputy Chief Constables with Wiltshire Police.
And are you based at police headquarters in Devizes?
Yes, I am.
And you've been a police officer for 29 years, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And when did you transfer to Wiltshire Police?
I transferred to Wiltshire Police in 2007 from Northamptonshire Police.
Moving to your role at the time of the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings, at the time of the poisoning of Sir Guy and Julia Skripal on the 4th of March 2018, Were you an assistant chief constable?
That's correct.
And had you been in that role since September 2014?
That's correct.
And I think, as it happens, the day after the Skripal poisonings, on the 5th of March, you were promoted to temporary Deputy Chief Constable.
Yes, that was a planned promotion, notwithstanding these events.
Yeah.
So was that also the rank you held at the time of Dawn Sturgess's poisoning?
Yes, it was.
And that promotion, then it's relevant to deal with both as your roles overlapped. Could you confirm for me that you held the following roles? So first of all, on the 4th of March 2018, the date of the Skripal poisonings, were you the on-call chief officer?
Yes, I was.
And does that mean what it says, the most senior officer who is on call at the time?
That is correct.
Chief officers being presumably the chief constable, you, the deputy, and the assistants?
Yes, so at that point in time, so we had a chief constable. We didn't actually have a deputy, so there was 2 assistant chief constables, and we worked on a rota.
Thank you very much.
And so what is the chief officer's role in those circumstances?
So it is an on-call role. Below it, you have a superintendent who, in essence, is the silver commander for the force 24/7 during any given period. And the role of the chief officer really is around what I would call critical incidents which may have a significant impact upon the force. And indeed upon those who we provide a service to. So it's an escalation role. You are contacted by the superintendent in the event of such an incident happening, at which point in time you would take on the role of what's called a gold commander to oversee the policing response to such an incident.
So secondly, in terms of your roles over this period, between the 5th of March and the 23rd of March, so the period of the immediate response to the Skripal poisonings, did you chair the Wiltshire and Swindon Local Resilience Forum Strategic Coordination Group?
Yes, I did.
And we'll abbreviate that, if we may, to SCG. Briefly...
That's a bit of a mouthful, Ms. Whitelaw.
Indeed.
Well, give it to me again.
That is the Wiltshire and Swindon Local Resilience Forum Strategic Coordination Group. And if I may, so I'm going to break that down a little bit.
Please.
To start with the Local Resilience Forum, is that a process for bringing together responders within a police force area under the Civil Contingencies Act 2004 so that they cooperate and fulfil various roles and responsibilities in response to an incident?
Yes, it is. That is the framework for civil protection in a given police force area, working with partners.
So it's an incident-specific.
It's a little bit further than that, sir. So the Act creates an obligation to make sure there's appropriate planning in place around potential emergency incidences, and then there's a response element of it as well. So in relation to the SCG, if I may call it that, that is the response element of it, and SCGs and also what's called TCGs, which is the Tactical Coordinating Group, they're put in place if an incident does occur to make sure there's an appropriate response.
Yes, and all this is a system which has been thought out in advance and is applied when something happens. Is that it?
That's right, sir, and it comes from the learning of other events.
Right.
So the SCG is a multi-agency body.
Yes.
For coordinating the local joint response to an emergency at local strategic level. Is that correct?
Yes, and I think the key word there is the emergency element of it. So it's normally at a point where a major incident has been declared, and then there's different levels of partners in it. There's Category 1 partners and Category 2 partners, which would come together as a multi-agency forum to oversee the strategic response.
And so those partners, if I can just zoom out a little bit to the broader membership, would that include Wiltshire Police, but also counter-terrorism police in these incidents, Wiltshire Council, Public Health England? You're nodding, but if you could just say yes so that we have it on the
yes,
transcript.
sorry. Yeah,
Thank
yes,
you.
yes.
Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and potentially military representatives as well, those sorts of partner bodies.
It would. I think it's important to give that context that some of those bodies are national bodies that wouldn't normally be involved in a local response, but due to the nature of what we were dealing with, they came alongside what would be the normal, what I would call Category 1 responders.
So representatives attending the meetings?
Yes, that's right.
And you mentioned sitting beneath that SCG was a tactical coordinating group to deliver tactical responses. So is that also multi-agency?
Yes, it is. And just to briefly expand on that, so the SCG sets the strategy for the overall response, and then the TCG is responsible for putting in place a tactical plan to actually deliver the strategy.
And could we just go to INQ 005141 on the screen, please? This is a witness statement made in December 2019 by a witness we're going to hear from later. But if I could just go to page 3, please. If you could look at that top paragraph there, which deals with the SCG. And in particular, I just want to draw your attention, 5 lines down, the SCG was responsible for steps taken to protect the public outside the national security investigation. Is that something with which you agree?
Yes, I do agree with that. I think it was very much a partnership. We're intelligence-led by the investigation and what's going on in the investigation, but absolutely the responsibility, both at a local level and a national level with national partners, was to oversee that public health response element.
And so in terms of the interaction between your role as the chair of the SCG and other policing roles, is it right that Wiltshire Police initially and then counter-terrorism police, when they took over, were responsible for the evidential investigation, whereas the SCG was responsible for consequence management?
Yes, that is correct. In both incidences, Wiltshire Police initially responded, initially undertook the investigation, and then there was a handover to counter-terrorism policing, who then took on the investigation thereafter.
We'll come back to that, but you define consequence management in your summary witness statement, and I'm looking at page 3, paragraph 10b, as the steps taken to prevent the impact of any incident escalating. Can you just give us some examples of what that would be in practice?
Yes, probably the best example I could give with this that became very apparent to me early on with this. You had 2 investigations ongoing. You had the investigation into who had actually committed this act, but from an SCG perspective, you had an investigation into public health. What I said at the time was we had to establish who touched what, when, where, and what was the public health risk as a result of that. So putting, again, that into context, as we heard yesterday with the Skripals, we know that they were poisoned at their home address, then came into Salisbury and went to different locations. A real big part of the SCG's work was to understand the timeline of where they'd been, had they transferred any of the Novichok, and if so, what was the public health risk.
Thank you. So we've spoken about your first 2 roles. Thirdly, did you undertake the same role, that's the SCG chair, between the 3rd of July 2018 and the 5th of September 2018? That is the period of response to the poisonings of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley.
Yes, I did.
And in both the Salisbury and Amesbury investigations, were the dates at which you ceased your role as chair of the SCG when leadership of the SCG was handed over from Wiltshire Police to Wiltshire Council for the recovery phase of the operation?
Yes, that is correct. I would just say, in relation to that wording, Madam, that at the point the SCG stands down, from a response perspective, it does actually stand down. There's a process whereby you go over to recovery. At that point in time, the SCG is no longer in existence. There are different structures for the recovery.
And we may mention one of those in a minute. In fact, I'll come to it now. Fourth, in the time between the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings, so that's the 10th of April and the 10th of May, I think you were also chair of a remediation strategic coordinating group. Is that the structure, one of the structures that you were talking about that would come after the SCG? Yes,
and if I may just give some context, what would normally happen in an emergency response is there is a definable position where the emergency response has come to an end. With this, due to the complexity of it, we had to put in place a tailored handover certificate. So there's normally a handover from the chair of the strategic coordination group to the local council, a gentleman called Alistair Cunningham, who would then take that on, and their responsibility is for remediation, in this case contextually very much around the scenes that we had, but also for regeneration as well in terms of the impact. This has clearly had an impact on Salisbury and then latterly Amesbury. That was their role. The slight difference here in terms of me coming back into play a role was a particular strand of the recovery strategy was around remediation of those sites. It was a highly technical exercise which has been led by Wiltshire Council and DEFRA, but they needed the help and the assistance of the emergency services and other partners, so I agreed to undertake that role as you've described.
So far we've talked about local structures, but a fifth role I think you undertook is, did you co-chair the National Health Emergency Response Cell?
Yes, I did.
And can you briefly just explain what that body is and how and when it was established, by reference, if you need to your witness?
Yeah, thank you. So in normal circumstances, again, you would have at a local level, I'm sorry for all the abbreviations, is something called the STAC, which is the Scientific Technical Advice Cell, which I set up. However, due to the complexity of the science relative to the attack, it was agreed by government that we needed to put in place the Health Emergency Response Cell. So it's led by the government, chaired by the Home Office, with me locally as the co-chair. And its role really was to be the bridge between the local scientific advice into something which sat above it, which is called SAGE. So that's the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. So in essence, they're giving the advice to myself at a local level.
So it operates underneath SAGE, which many people may have heard about.
Yes, and it was a new entity, so just to try and, I guess, bridge the local to the national.
Right, thank you.
So in addition to those 5 specific roles that I've mentioned, did you also represent Wiltshire Police at various local, regional and national meetings?
I did, yes.
You've just mentioned one of the national bodies that will be a familiar name to many of us, SAGE. Was your experience that at least part of the role of SAGE in the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings, together with Public Health England, was to provide scientific and public health advice?
Yes, it was.
One of the other national bodies we may hear about and with which the public will be familiar is COBRA. Does COBRA facilitate fast-time briefing of senior ministers and officials?
Yes, it does.
You mentioned, I think, attending some of those meetings.
I did, yes.
Next, if I could ask you, please, about Wiltshire Police's names for the operations for the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings. What was the name given to the SCG response to the poisoning of the Skripals?
That was Operation Fairline.
And what was the name given to the response to the poisonings of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley?
That was Operation Fortis.
Now, these names are distinct, aren't they, from the counter-terrorism police operation names that we've heard and will hear more about, Wadana, Katerva and Reed?
That's correct.
I'd like to just next cover the status of Operation Fairline. So, to recap, that's the response to the Skripals. At the time Operation Fortis came into being, and for your reference to orientate yourself, I'm looking at paragraph 33 of your summary statement.
Thank you. So, as has been detailed, on the 23rd of March, the Strategic Coordination Group had been stood down. Again, as discussed, remediation activity and recovery activity was ongoing, led by Wiltshire Council. The investigation in relation to the attack on the Skripals and Sergeant Bailey was still ongoing at that point in time. And also as an organisation, both as Wiltshire Police, but also as part of the Strategic Coordination Group and Local Resilience Forum, we'd undertaken a learning exercise which had been conducted by the College of Policing, which had run from the 25th of June to the 29th of June.
Could we just ask you on that point, the College of Policing is the national professional body for the police service in England and Wales, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And you said that there was a debrief learning process. I think that was due to report on the Skripal poisoning response, Operation Fairline, but then Operation Fortis came into being. So is it right that, in fact, that the two were amalgamated so that they actually, in fact, they didn't report until later October?
Yes, that is correct. So we'd undertaken the sessions during that week that I've described to elicit the learning, led by the College of Policing, who'd undertaken a number of reviews into big incidences and had been selected by the local resilience forum. But due to then the immediacy of the Fortis operation, we didn't have that learning written down in terms of the recommendations. So ultimately, post-Operation Fortis, we ran another learning exercise with the College of Policing, which was undertaken in September, and the report for that was received on the 24th of October 2018.
So the first College of Policing's examination of what had happened and planned and debrief, what you described as a debrief, was due to report just about at the time that the second incident took place. Is that right?
So just give that context there. So it had actually taken place the week directly before. It had finished on the Friday,
right, and
then on the 30th, so it finished on the 29th, on the 30th, you then have incident number 2.
And so you did it, you paused, have I got this right? You paused and undertook to add in the new information and the new events.
Yes. Right. And it became a combined report in the end, sir.
Okay, got it.
Thank you.
So if I can summarise it in this way, at the time that Operation Fortis came into being, a number of actions were still ongoing within Operation Fairline, and also you've mentioned the investigation, the counter-terrorism police investigation into Skripal poisoning was still ongoing.
Yes, it was, yes.
And importantly, the item or items used to deliver the poison in the Skripal poisoning had not been located at the time of
no, they hadn't.
Dawn Sturgess' poisoning. And indeed, you didn't know in June, July 2018 whether there was a vessel or container that had been discarded still in or around Salisbury or Wiltshire or in the country.
We did not know.
Given that, do you agree that in those circumstances, Wiltshire police officers ought to have been advised to be particularly alert to any signs of nerve agent poisoning from March 2018 onwards?
I can give that some context if I can, Madam. So what had been formulated by the National CBRN Centre was advice which had gone out to what are called CT commanders and CT tactical advisors. That had been put in place in March post the Skripal attack and gave an overview, said that it was an isolated incident, was the intelligence, and there wasn't believed to be a further risk. However, did give some information in relation to signs and symptoms of Novichok and reaffirmed what our standing protocols around what a CBRN response would look like, and also gave information around contacting the National CBRN Centre, which sits across the fire service, the police service and the ambulance service, and is there to provide advice and guidance. So that's the national element. From a local level, yes, I absolutely reflect that we didn't put anything further out. Clearly, police officers are trained in relation to generic responses, but I do believe in hindsight, it would have been sensible just to put some advice and guidance out, just confirming that which was already there.
Thank you. And we're going to come back to this in more detail when we look at the Wiltshire Police response to Dawn Sturgess' poisoning later in the week. We're also going to hear much more evidence about public health later in the inquiry. But one point for now, please. In your summary witness statement, for your reference at paragraph 185, you refer to a statement made by Jenny Harris, the then Deputy Medical Director of PHE, on the 23rd of March 2018, the day Operation Fairline was stood down, which said the risk to the general public from this incident remains low and this has not changed. The public's safety is our number one priority, and we've adopted a precautionary approach to those who were in the pub or restaurant within the specified time frame. Was that the last public health-related message issued during the life cycle of the Operation Fairline SEG?
Yes, it was. Yes.
Appreciating what we've previously acknowledged, that you didn't know at this time about any item or items used to deliver the poison and whether any was discarded, as far as you were aware, was there any precautionary advice to the public at this time not to pick up any unusual items or items that didn't belong to them? That is before June 2018.
No, and if I may just give some context, so in relation to the development of the advice which is contained within my statement, early on it was agreed that Public Health England nationally would develop that advice, and clearly that would be informed by intelligence, but in relation to my role locally, there was no advice which was given to us to actually then put out. We did have a media cell in place, but we didn't get any advice to put out, as you've described, what ultimately became the mantra: if you didn't drop it, don't pick it up.
So you've said you didn't locally, but also just to clarify, I think you said no at the beginning of your answer, but were you aware of any national advice not to pick up objects before 30th of June?
No, I was not.
If I could move now to address the respective roles of each of the policing bodies in these investigations. So starting first of all with Wiltshire Police, your force, the local police force which initially responded to and investigated both incidents because they occurred in your force area. Is that a good summary?
Yes, it is, yes.
And there came a time, didn't there, and I think in the case of Dawn Sturgess it was on the 4th of July, where responsibility for the criminal investigation was passed to counter-terrorism policing.
Yes, that is correct.
And as far as you were aware, was the timing for that when DSTL had indicated that tests on Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley were indicating that they'd been poisoned with Novichok?
Yes, that's right, and that's the point where I...
Date again, please.
The 4th of July.
Yes, 4th of July, and that's the date where the second major incident was declared, sir.
Thank you. That was because by then the source of her illness had been confirmed?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And once counter-terrorism policing took over, did Wiltshire Police become responsible for consequence management, which we've discussed, operating through the SCG?
Yes, that is correct in both instances.
The second policing body we're going to hear more detail about from the next witness, but that's counter-terrorism policing. Is your understanding that counter-terrorism policing is a collaboration of UK police forces working with the intelligence community to protect the public and national security?
That is correct.
And I think the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police is responsible for counter-terrorism policing South East.
Yes.
In 2018, was that known as the South East Counter-Terrorism Unit?
Yes, it was.
And that was the regional branch of counter-terrorism policing at the time, was it?
It was, and if it's helpful, I can give some context. As you say, it's a regional structure, and at that point in time across England and Wales, what had happened, there'd been a journey from local special branches that were actually hosted under chief constables locally in their own forces to a mixture of what's called counter-terrorism units that had the ability to investigate and also consider intelligence. And then you had what's called CTIUs, which is counter-terrorism intelligence units. And that's what we had in the southwest of England, where their role is purely in relation to intelligence and they don't have an investigative capability, hence why we were reliant upon the southeast.
So I'm going to take that a bit more slowly,
Sorry,
if I may, because it will be new to some people. So we've talked about the southeast, but of course you're in the southwest. So there was also a southwest counter-terrorism unit at the time.
So there was a southwest counter-terrorism intelligence unit.
Thank you.
And the important differentiation is it doesn't have an investigative arm of it at that point.
That South East did.
Yes.
Which is why we may see involvement of South East
Yes.
counter-terrorism policing coming in. And the Metropolitan Police Services, SO15, is the National Counter-Terrorism Command based in London.
Yes.
We're going to come back to more detail, as I say, about counter-terrorism policing from the next witness. But the third policing body you mentioned, which I just want to ask you briefly about, was Wiltshire Police Special Branch. So going back in time, did that exist in 2010 onwards?
So I would say it existed before that, but certainly in terms of the material times for the public inquiry, in 2010 that was a standalone unit which was called Special Branch in Wiltshire Police that came under the direction and control of the Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police.
So a standalone
Yes.
under Wiltshire Police dealing with counter-terrorism matters.
Yes, that's right.
And then when did that change from being a standalone Wiltshire Police Special Branch?
And you'll forgive me, this is quite complex. We're talking about a decade where we're going from localisation to regionalisation to ultimately nationalisation. That from a Wiltshire perspective, in 2011, we entered into a collaborative agreement with Avon and Somerset Police, whereby Special Branch was actually delivered then across the two forces, and that was the early inception of the South West Counter-Terrorism Intelligence Unit.
So it grew, did it, into the South West Counter-Terrorism Unit?
It did, sir, and if I may just briefly continue to help you, then in 2013, what happened is that in addition to the two forces I've described, Devon and Cornwall and Dorset Police also formed part of that. So we now, by that point, have a South West CTIU, I can use that terminology, that consists of 4 of the 5 forces in the South West policing area.
Yeah. Got it.
So that was 2013 that it began to expand. Yes. So when we see references to Wiltshire Police Special Branch in 2018, was there still the standalone at all, or is that the vernacular used for the now more the collaboration with other forces?
Yeah, I have to be careful here, madam, in relation to my knowledge of this, because as I say, you had an element of regional and national also going on. My understanding, and I underline understanding here, is that we still, in a collaborative arrangement, had a local special branch. Often we describe it as hub and spoke. So you've got the hub in the centre, but then the spoke in this example is Wiltshire Police, actually having a special branch within this collaborative arrangement. And then, again, my understanding is the South West CTIU had additional capabilities, such as the wider assessment of information intelligence, and also then the link into the security services, which was facilitated through them. Probably the final bit, if I may, was in terms of the on-call facility, which is material to the public inquiry, that was provided by the South West CTIU.
So we'll come to the factual specifics later, but in general terms, if Wiltshire Police want some information from the South West CTIU, do they have access to that information directly to their records, or would they have to contact the CTIU to ask them for that information?
Again, this is something we can go away and do some further research on if required. My understanding is certainly in 2010 we had a standalone system which was called the National Special Branch Intelligence System. You'll forgive me, due to the passage of time, it's been difficult to work out exactly what systems were in place once we then go into a regional collaboration in 2011. We are trying to do some work in the background to further assist the inquiry with that.
Thank you. Perhaps we can come back to that then. So returning to the various policing bodies that were involved in the Salisbury and Amesbury investigations, is it right that, as is usual for significant resource-intensive incidents, other police forces around the country provided mutual aid officers to assist?
That is correct.
Particularly because I think that Wiltshire is one of the smallest forces in the country, is that right?
Yes, we're the 3rd smallest force in the country, and very early on in both instances, we put in place what is called, as you referred to, mutual aid, which means through a national coordination approach, we're able to bring other officers in to work alongside Wiltshire officers.
So you're calling in additional officers from other forces?
That's correct, sir. And in addition to what we've described around the counter-terrorism investigation, this is very much around supporting us with the multiple scenes that we had that we needed to guard.
Yep.
Just to mention one further policing name that we have already heard something of and will hear more of, that's Operation Verbasco, and the name being given to the joint police operation between CTPSE and the Metropolitan Police's SO15 that was set up specifically for the inquest inquiry. Is it right that Wiltshire Police is not part of Operation Verbasco, but it's worked with it to assist the inquiry?
It is, that's right.
Thank you. I want to move now just to explaining very briefly the stage at which you and Wiltshire Police became aware and involved in the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess. So Dawn was taken ill on the morning of the 30th of June 2018, as we know, but is it correct that Wiltshire Police wasn't informed or aware of this until the evening?
That is correct.
And by reference to paragraph 37 of your summary statement, could you just tell us when and how Wiltshire Police became aware of the incident?
Yes, high level, Madam. At 18:58 hours, we received a call into our control room, which is called the communication centre, from the fire service. And again, to give context, the fire service in Wiltshire is the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue Service that provides a service across two forces. We were told at that point in time by their control room that there was a potential hazmat incident. Hazmat basically refers to hazardous material, that the ambulance service was attending at number 9 Muggleton Road in Amesbury. And it was confirmed within this call that at that point, this was for information purposes only.
Thank you. If we could pause there for a moment. That was the address of Charlie Rowley, 9 Muggleton Road. Could we have up on screen, please, INQ 005033? And this should be a transcript of the call you've just mentioned. You'll see hazmat in big letters there.
Yes.
It's come via the fire service, and it's nearly 7 o'clock in the evening.
Yes.
So is this notification to you of something happening to Dawn Sturgess in the morning, or to Charlie Rowley in the afternoon, or both?
At this point in time, sir, it's purely telling us about a hazmat potential incident.
Simply that address.
There's further calls that happen quickly after in the sequence where we become aware.
Well, so
of
you'll
it.
see on the screen, it says a female in respiratory arrest. We've got a second patient unable to breathe and unresponsive. A third patient also displaying symptoms was what was said in the call. And then further down, you'll see 9 Muggleton Road.
Yeah.
We've gone on, it might be a possible hazmat. And we could go down to the bottom. So ambulance are on scene, question mark. Well, they've passed it to us, but I don't know if they're actually on scene. Let me have a look. And then what the ambulance said, and can we go over the page on that, please? Thank you. 3 casualties basically suffering respiratory problems. Ambulance have no clue what's caused the symptoms, so we're going on worst case scenario really. Do you need police attendance? It's just an inform for us at the moment so that you're aware, obviously, if we find out any more. So that was the call that you've described to the police call handler. Thank you. If you could go on to the next point of information that you received, which I think was 1902.
Yes, it was. So at that point in time, again, we receive a call into the communications centre, which is from the ambulance service. So that's South West Ambulance Service. And at this point, they're querying whether or not Wiltshire Police are aware of what they describe as a special job.
Thank you. If you could pause there for a moment. Could we have on screen, please, INQ 005034? And this should be that, similarly, a transcript. If you want to look at that and just explain what that call said.
Yes, so high level in relation to this, further to use of the term special job. During the call, the ambulance service informed us that they'd attended an incident at the same property earlier that day, described symptoms of that individual as respiratory arrest and severe breathing problems.
That's 2/3 of the way down the page, just to orientate with the page.
They then updated us that the individual had been taken to Salisbury District Hospital, and they had now returned back to the property and were dealing with what was stated to be 2 further patients at that point in time. And they give an overview of symptoms to be excessive drooling, sweating, and stating that certainly one of the males was unresponsive and making really weird noises.
Could we just go over the page on that? Thank you.
And then ultimately, the ambulance service states that it's a significant response for the ambulance service and the fire service.
So at the top of that page, we've got breathing problems, completely incoherent. That was the symptoms being described. At that point, we had the first patient that went into respiratory arrest, and they thought she just had a fit. then talking about first patient, Dawn Sturgess, being in hospital, and then further down at the... She got taken to Salisbury District, but just so you're aware of it, obviously I don't know the full details at the moment, just thought you might want to know. It's going to be a significant response from ourselves and the fire service as well. So this is at 1902.
Yes.
So forgive me if I'm slow to catch up, but that's only 4 minutes after you had a rather similar notification call from the fire service.
That's correct, sir. Yes.
Both of them are about Muddleton Road. Both of them refer to a patient earlier in the day, apparently a female patient earlier in the day, and to further patient or patients in the evening.
That's correct, sir.
Right.
Thank you. Could we take that down, please? And I think then there was a third call at 1909 from the fire service, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
According to your statement, asking Wiltshire Police for their estimated time of arrival. And in between these calls was a decision made by the force incident manager, Inspector Noble, that police should attend and officers were dispatched.
Yes, that is correct.
If we could go to INQ 004989. And that you'll see is that police log, if you could confirm.
That is correct.
And on the second page, we see it 1912 resorts dispatched and arrived at scene 1919 on the 30th.
Yeah.
So does that indicate the time at which police officers were attending?
Yes, that is correct.
9 Rubbleton Road. And I'm going to leave what happened next there to be picked up by both by you in your further evidence this week and by the evidence of the first responders, sir, that we're going to hear from later.
All right.
But what I do want to just confirm with you is the point at which you yourself became involved. So by reference to paragraph 81 of your statement, if you need to, please could you tell us how you became involved?
If I just take a moment.
Of course.
So in relation to the Muggleton Road incident, so contextually, incident occurred on the Saturday. We now go forward to Monday, the 2nd of July at 16:38 hours. I wasn't the on-call chief officer at that point in time, but I was in my role as the Deputy Chief Constable. I was contacted by the on-call superintendent, who was called Superintendent Burt, and he gave me, would you like me to give a high-level overview of what he told me?
Yes, indeed.
Yes. He gave me an overview that an incident had occurred over the weekend. 2 people had been taken to Salisbury District Hospital and both remained seriously unwell. He indicated that initially the hypothesis was one that it had been a drugs overdose. However, that had developed to be a drugs overdose where there was potential pesticide poisoning within that, which is commonly referred to as a bad batch incident. He then went on to indicate to me that there was wider public health messaging which had been put out by DS Martin, who the inquiry will hear from later, and that was warning the public. He also stated to me that as a precaution, because of the pesticide element, samples, which I believe were urine, had been sent to DSTL Porton Down for analysis, and we awaited the results of those. And then he gave me a high-level overview that he'd also been in contact with Superintendent Minty, who'd been the chair of the TCG for Operation Fairline, the Skripal incident, who was a CBRN commander, and CBRN advice had been sought. And he'd also spoken to Mr. Bob Young, who was basically the major incident manager for Wiltshire Police at that time. So at that point, I was aware that this was precautionary and we awaited the results. And at the conclusion of the conversation, I asked for to be updated if there was any discernible change in the circumstances described.
So you were being kept informed pending test results,
yes,
and you wanted to be kept updated. And moving to paragraph 94 for your reference of your statement, were you subsequently updated or did you receive an update at around 7 o'clock on Tuesday, the 3rd of July?
Yes, I did.
So 7 o'clock in the evening, I should say. And could you just tell us about that call?
Yes, I can. So I was at home at that point in time, and I'd worked extensively during Operation Fairline with DSTL, and I was contacted by a gentleman called Tim from DSTL, who'd sat on the strategic coordination group and had been my key advisor. And he stated to me that the two patients, the testing had come back and it indicated Novichok. He put that in a statistical context for me and stated that he was 75% sure that they'd been poisoned with Novichok, and this was moving further to a question from myself to 100% clarity that was indeed the case.
Sorry, who had... This was information 75 to 100% certain Novichok involved. In which incident?
So this is in the incident number 2. This is the Dawn Sturgess incident.
Muggleton Road. Thank you.
So this is the call on the 3rd of July. And was that the basis upon which you decided to stand up the SCG again?
Yes, it was immediate from that point in time what the public health risk was. So I made a number of calls to set up the strategic coordination group meeting, which later sat that evening, and that was the point in time where I declared a second major incident.
So that was the same multi-agency structure that had already been in place for the Skripal poisoning and been stood down. You created it again, did you?
I did. If I may just add a slight caveat to that, for incident number 1, it was clear due to the public health related nature of this that I needed some what I would call key partners around the table. So for incident number 1, which was very much around shutting down scenes and assuring public safety, yes, counter-terrorism policing were around the table, public health partners, council, and then we expanded it when we got to day 2 to a wider meeting, which was more mirroring what had been in place for...
So going back to the first meeting in the evening, your paragraph 97, which bodies were represented at that meeting?
So at that meeting, you had Wiltshire Police, counter-terrorism policing were involved right from the very start. You had Wiltshire Council, and you had public health partners, the hospital was there, and NHS England were there at that point in time from memory.
Which is PHE at the time, I
Yes,
think.
public health, yes, which is...
And so did counter-terrorism policing attend on the basis that they were still at the time investigating the Skripal poisoning?
I guess yes, but clearly there was new information here that notwithstanding incident number 1, the likelihood was that it had been confirmed as Novichok, that they would have had primacy right from the very start.
And you said you declared a major incident, so was that after that first meeting at 22:27? Yes,
it was. We obtained a situational awareness of what had gone on over the last number of days, obviously the confirmation that it was Novichok, and at that point in time it was clear to me that a major incident needed to be declared.
So can you just explain for us what is meant by the declaration of a major incident?
Yes, a major incident, I can't give verbatim the definition, but contextually what it means is...
Sorry, could I help you just by you, in your statement of paragraph 15, I think you summarised it in case
yes.
it helps you.
Thank you. Yes, so contextually, what it means is that there is a response required by one or more of the emergency services under their major incident plans. So each of the emergency services has major incident plans. And again, for one or more of the emergency services, there's a requirement to put in place special arrangements to actually deal with the incident which is facing them.
And who can declare a major incident?
So any one of the partners under the Local Resilience Forum structure, which I described earlier, can declare a major incident.
So could the ambulance or the fire service have declared one?
Absolutely. And indeed the hospital.
So that was the Tuesday evening, the 3rd of July. And in the early hours of Wednesday, the 4th of July, were all the scenes of relevance to the movements of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley, as known at the time, which we'll come on to hear about, secured and preserved by Wiltshire Police?
Yes, for me that, in addition to the treatment of Dawn and Charlie, that was absolutely the number one priority. As I explained earlier, the potential movement of the Novichok in that period created a significant potential public health risk, and we had to ensure all of those scenes were identified and locked down.
And just to deal with the morning of the 4th of July 2018, I think you took part in a national call. This is paragraph 102 of your statement for your reference.
Thank you. Yes. Yes, I did. So very similar to the relationships that we developed in Operation Fairline, the Chief Constable and I had a conversation with the Executive of Counter-Terrorism Policing, which was Assistant Commissioner Basu, and at that point in time, it was confirmed that they would be leading the investigation into the poisoning of Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess.
So at 10:40 on the 4th of July 2018, you and the Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police had a conversation with Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu of the Counter-Terrorism Police, and that was when it was decided that Counter-Terrorism Police would take over.
Yes, clearly they'd attended the evening before, so there was a degree of collaborative working going on and a degree of handover at that point, but certainly at an executive level, that was when that was confirmed, and again we would undertake locally through the SCG and the LRF the consequence management role.
And on that day, did you also attend a COBRA officials call?
Yes, I did.
And could you just tell us what was confirmed by reference to paragraph 103 at that time?
So I attended that call. During the course of the call, it was confirmed that Novichok, as was described the evening before, had caused Dawn and Charlie to become unwell. It was outlined that the mode and location of the delivery of the Novichok at that point was unknown. However, the lead hypothesis was that they somehow had picked it up and come into contact with discarded Novichok from the Skripal poisoning.
We know that Dawn Sturgess very sadly died on the 8th of July 2018. Did Operation Fortis continue and the response work of the SCG continue until the 5th of September 2018?
Yes, it did.
When there was the handover to the recovery phase to Wiltshire Council, is that correct?
That is correct.
On a final topic, Deputy Chief Constable, and I'm referring to paragraphs 31 and 32 of your summary statement. Later this week, we'll hear evidence, as I said, from factual witnesses about Wiltshire Police's response to the poisonings of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley. But there's just one further point you deal with in your summary that I'd like to address with you shortly now. You say at paragraph 31 of your statement that Wiltshire Police had received intelligence reports relating to Dawn Sturgess's address and her association with Charlie Rowley and his drug-taking behaviour. However, there was no intelligence that Dawn Sturgess herself was a drug user. And you go on to say that you're aware that in certain Wiltshire Police documents, Charlie Rowley and Dawn Sturgess are described as two known drug users. Is there something you would like to say about that?
Yes, absolutely, there is. Important in terms of these documents, these are documents that were created post-incident. They weren't existing records prior to these incidences, but on two occasions there are documents which refer to them both collectively as known drug users, as has been detailed, and I'll go on to explain in my future evidence. That is correct in relation to Charlie Rowley, but is not correct in relation to Dawn Sturgess. There was indeed reasons to suspect that she may have become unwell due to her association with drugs, but notwithstanding that, there was no police intelligence that she was a drug user. And in relation to that, I would like to, on behalf of the Chief Constable and Wiltshire Police, apologise for that internal error to the family. I can only try and understand the impact of that further to their loss.
Thank you, Deputy Chief Constable. Those are the questions I propose to ask you at this stage by way of introduction to your role and that of Wiltshire Police. And as we said, you're due to give evidence later in the week.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Mills, I gather you're going to be coming back from time to time. Your evidence has been, as it were, compartmentalised. You're free to go, of course, and if between now and your return you need to confer with counsel about the remains of your evidence, then of course you're free to do so. What I don't want you doing is going over the ground that you've just covered.
Thank you, sir. That's
Thank you very much.
So would it be a suitable time for a morning break?
Yes. All right, that's what I thought. 20 past 11, please.
Morning, Commander Murphy. As you know, my name's Francesca Whitelaw and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Now, Commander Murphy, either sit down or stand according to taste.
Thank you, sir.
Could you give us your full name, please?
Yes, thank you. My name is Dominic Murphy, and I am the commander of SO15, the Counter-Terrorism Command in the Met Police.
Thank you very much for attending today to give evidence.
And that is?
SO15 is the Counter-Terrorism Command of London, sir, so CT policing in London. Plus, I have a number of national responsibilities, which I'm sure we'll cover in due course.
Thank you.
Could you look at your witness statement, which should be in front of you? This is your open witness statement to the inquiry, extending to 48 pages, dated the 2nd of October 2024. So it should be tab 11 in your bundle. There are a number of documents bearing Commander Murphy's name.
Yes.
Tab 11 should be the witness statement. For the transcript, the reference is INQ 006056. On page 48, there should be a signature.
That's correct.
Is that your signature?
It is.
And are the contents of that witness statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are, yes.
Thank you.
I would, if I might, sir, please express on behalf of Counter-Terrorism Policing my deepest condolences to the Sturgess family and, of course, to Charlie Rowley. But in addition to that, pay due respects to Sergei and Yulia Skripal and Ollie Bell and Nick Bailey, two police officers that were responding to that first incident and also suffered from poisoning. And sir, if I might, also the people of Salisbury. I was here for many, many months during this incident, and I was, as were my team, incredibly impressed by the resilience and compassion shown by the people of Salisbury and who were greatly affected by this incident. So thank you for the chance to do that.
Thank you.
Commander Murphy, much with the previous witness, this is an introductory evidence from your point of view, and you're due to return to the inquiry a number of times to give evidence on different tranches.
Yes.
You have introduced to the chair and the inquiry your role. How long have you held that role?
So I've been the commander now for just approaching 2 years.
You've set out your professional background in detail in your witness statement. I'll be referring to paragraphs 6 to 10 onwards for your reference. Did you join Hertfordshire Constabulary in 1994?
I did, yes, sir.
And you became a detective constable in 1999?
Yes.
And did that involve working in CID on a murder team and in a covert role?
Yes, it did.
And was that until you joined what was Special Branch in 2003?
Yes, that's correct, in Hertfordshire.
In 2005, were you seconded to SO13, which was then the Metropolitan Police Anti-Terrorist Branch, as part of the response to the 7/7 bombings?
Yes, I attended on the first day of 7/7 and then spent a considerable amount of time working with SO13 in response to that incident.
And did you transfer permanently to SO15 in 2006?
Yes, I did.
And have you worked in counter-terrorism roles since then?
Yes.
And I think your experience included responding to and assisting in the management of evidence in the Litvinenko poisoning, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And is it right that as a result of your experiences with the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings, you subsequently qualified as a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear, we'll hear the term CBRN, strategic commander?
Yes, that's correct.
But I think you weren't qualified in that role at the time of the poisonings.
Yes, that's correct.
But is it the case that counter-terrorism police took advice from CBRN specialists throughout those investigations?
We did, yes.
And have you held leadership positions in the responses to nearly all of the terrorist attacks in London over recent years?
Yes, that's correct. As a result of being on SO15, I've been involved in terrorist attacks both in the UK and overseas.
And you were awarded the Queen's Police Medal in 2020 for services to policing and counter-terrorism?
Yes, that's correct.
Before I move on to ask you about your role and that of counter-terrorism policings in the events of 2018, if I could deal with just a preliminary point, please, and I'd be grateful if you could confirm these matters for me. As may be obvious to many, your role leading SO15 counter-terrorism command is a sensitive one.
Yes.
And in the course of the investigations that you're going to address in your evidence and the course of this inquiry, you've had access to security-sensitive material.
That's correct, I have.
We know that Dawn Sturgess' inquest was converted to a public inquiry precisely so that sensitive material, which might otherwise be excluded for reasons of public interest immunity, could be considered by the chair, and importantly, open gists capturing the important and relevant detail that some sensitive documents may contain could be provided.
Yes, that's correct.
And is the relevance of this to your evidence that, as you set out at paragraph 14 of your witness statement, some of the information included in your statement represents an open gist of the contents of closed documents?
Yes, that's correct.
And is the practical effect of that that there may be instances where you're not able to identify an underlying document for your evidence?
Yes.
Or it may be that you're not able to answer a question for reasons of national security?
Yes, that's correct as well.
Or equally, it may be that you will need to ask for time to check a particular matter to ensure that you're providing as full an answer as possible without revealing material that the chair has determined is sensitive and subject to a restriction order.
Thank you. Yes, that's correct.
I deal with this now, sir, so that everybody understands it's a necessary approach in this case.
Yes.
With that introduction regarding documents, Commander Murphy, I'm going to ask you about the Verbasco police report. But could I start just by asking you to confirm in your evidence what we've heard in relation to Operation Verbasco, that it's a joint SO15 Metropolitan Police and Counter-Terrorism Policing South East operation that was set up for the inquest which was converted to public inquiry?
Yes, it was. That's correct.
Is there anything you'd like to add to what Lucy Mills has said in relation to Operation Verbasco?
No, I mean, it's a fully joint team between the South East and London, and it has worked to support the public inquiry and disclosure of material to you from a broad range of our operations and the information available to us.
And is one of the ways in which Operation Verbasco, so the Metropolitan Police and Thames Valley Police as core participants, have put as much material into the public domain as possible for the purposes of the inquiry through the Verbasco police report?
Yes, it is. That's correct.
If we could just go to INQ 005820 on the screen, please. This is, I think, the front page of that report. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And if we could just go to page 2, we'll see the index there, and page 3, please. Thank you. Could you just give us a summary of what that document is?
Yes, thank you. So this is a report that seeks to explain the role of counter-terrorism policing, plus also the frontline response to all of the incidents that we're here to consider, so as part of this public inquiry. And it deals with material that supports the response to those incidents and provides an update on all of the circumstances regarding both the counter-terrorism investigation and what we learned from the initial response to each of those scenes.
And it has extensive footnotes, is that right?
It does, that's correct.
That's the documents supporting the matters
Yes.
you've indicated. I'd like to confirm with you the process that was undertaken to achieve it. First of all, was the inquiry team given full access to all documents held by Operation Verbasco?
Yes, it was.
And secondly, did the inquiry legal team then identify topics relevant to the inquiry as terms of reference and ask Verbasco to address those through the report?
Yes, that's correct.
And thirdly, did both Verbasco and separately the inquiry legal team identify certain documents which should go into the report or be footnoted?
They did.
And fourthly, did that include sensitive material which could nonetheless be gisted into the report?
Yes, they did. That's correct.
And fifthly, did the report develop over the preparatory stages of the inquiry, going through several iterations?
It definitely did that, yes.
Yes, of course.
Until the inquiry was provided with a final iteration, the version we have now, which is dated October 2024.
That's correct.
So we'll be referring to that document throughout the course of the inquiry.
So this, in summary, tell me if I'm wrong, I may well be wrong, but from what you say, it sounds, Mr. Murphy, as if this is the distillation of the outcome of the work done by Operation Verbasco, in other words, by the combination of Counter-Terrorism Police South East and the Metropolitan Police.
Yes, sir, that's correct. And in close liaison with the inquest legal team, sir, to ensure that it answered the questions posed in the terms of reference for the inquiry.
Right. Thank you.
Could I ask you now then what your role was in March 2018?
Yes, in March 2018, I was a Detective Chief Inspector just about to be promoted to Detective Superintendent and to take over the command of an investigation team within counter-terrorism policing.
We'll come to the detail of the counter-terrorism policing investigations, but is it right to say that you were involved in the counter-terrorism police investigation into the Skripal's poisoning from the outset?
Yes, that's correct. I became involved on the 5th, so the Monday after the initial poisoning.
And did you assist the senior investigating officer, DSU VN 012?
So yes, I had several roles, but one of my first roles was to act as a critical friend for the SIO from CT Policing South East. That's the senior investigating officer in the South East.
And you were the senior investigating officer yourself for the investigation into the suspects?
Yes, that's correct.
And is it right you continue to lead all aspects of the National Security Police investigation?
I do.
And is that because the criminal investigation into the suspects remains ongoing?
It does remain ongoing, yes.
We are going to, in due course, in this inquiry, later in the inquiry, hear more detail about that, including from you. But for now, could you just confirm the names of the suspects you've set out at paragraph 208 of your witness statement?
Yes, so the names are Petrov, Bosharov and Fedotov. They have all been charged in those names.
And we've heard that they are aliases, is that right?
That is correct.
And could you give us the aliases for each of those?
Mishkin, Chapiga and Sergeyev.
And in terms of the charges against them, is it correct that on the 19th of July, the CPS authorised charges against Bosharov and Petrov for conspiracy to murder, 3 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of grievous bodily harm with intent, and 1 count of use or possession of a chemical weapon arising out of the Skripal's poisoning in Salisbury in March 2018?
Yes, that's correct.
And the individuals affected.
Yes, that's correct. So I attended the Westminster Magistrates Court in London and presented the case to the magistrate at the court and then secured those charges and warrants that then followed.
I'm just going to ask for those warrants to be put up on the screen for you to confirm, please. So if we could go to INQ 004908, first of all. And can you confirm what that document is?
Yes, that's an arrest warrant. I think it's called a first instance warrant, actually, technically, but where the magistrates' court have agreed that those individuals are charged in their absence.
Well, those are the charges, aren't they?
Yes, they are, sir.
And we see, don't we, that at the bottom, the date of that. This is, sorry, at the top it's Alexander Petrov is the name, and on the bottom is Friday, the 20th of July, 2018.
Yes.
And if we could then go on the screen to INQ 004909. Is that the same document for Bosharov?
It is, yes.
Again, we see the name at the top and the date at the bottom.
Yes.
And were those charges announced publicly on the 5th of September 2018?
They were, yes.
And I think on the 20th of April 2021, the CPS authorised charges against a third individual, Sergei Fedotov, for the same offences.
Yes, the investigation had continued after the charging date and the announcements in September to secure enough evidence to be able to charge Fedotov with the same offences.
So if we could just bring that up on screen as well, that's INQ 004580.
And that's July. Oh, July
2021, sir.
21.
Yes.
Again, we see the date at the bottom, the name at the top there.
Correct.
And at paragraph 201 of your witness statement, could you confirm what the status is of the criminal investigation, please?
Yes, thank you. So the criminal investigation continues to date. We are seeking further evidence, and we have, at this point, managed to secure sufficient evidence to identify them in their real names and of course, their membership of a Russian intelligence agency.
As I say, we will deal with some more detail in relation to the suspects in later weeks. But if I could move now to some questions about the way in which counter-terrorism, and in particular counter-state threat police investigations work in this country. Do they operate differently from criminal investigations?
Yes, so counter-terrorism investigations more generally operate differently to normal investigations. One of the main differences is the partners with which we work most closely. As you all know, we work very closely with MI5, but as a result of that, so we structure our investigations slightly differently because of the highly sensitive information that we have access to. There's an additional layer within counter-state threat investigations, and I'm the lead for counter-state threats investigations from policing for the UK. Those investigations have an additional layer of need-to-know principles where a smaller group of people are entitled or able to see the intelligence on a very strict need-to-know basis.
So, taking that in stages more slowly, who leads responsibility for counter-terrorism and national security in the UK?
So that is led by MI5, who is the agency responsible for those under UK law.
And MI5 works closely with MI6 and GCHQ, is that your
Yes, that's correct.
Understanding?
Yes.
Could you explain the structure of CT policing in the UK and SO15's role within it?
So the most senior police officer in the country for counter-terrorism is the Assistant Commissioner of Specialist Operations. At the time of this incident, that was transitioning between two different leaders. And under that, we have a senior national coordinator for counter-terrorism. That is an individual who's a Deputy Assistant Commissioner from the Metropolitan Police. And they have oversight of all investigations that happen around the country. I work for the senior national coordinator as the commander of the counter-terrorism command. We have three missions in counter-terrorism policing, but largely our main mission is counter-terrorism, as you would expect. We also do counter-state threat investigations, and we have a duty on behalf of the UK to manage war crimes investigations. Those last two, state threats and war crimes, come under me as national commitments as part of SO15's responsibility.
So CT policing, you've heard me put to DCC Mills, is a collaboration of UK police forces.
That's correct.
Working with the UK intelligence community.
Yes.
To help protect the public and national security by preventing, deterring and investigating terrorist activity. And you've drawn attention in particular to counter-state threat for the obvious reasons in these investigations. You mentioned the Assistant Commissioner Specialist Operations was transitioning between individuals in 2018. So can you just tell us who those individuals were?
Yes, so over the weekend, there was a transition period between Sir Mark Rowley, now the Commissioner of the Met Police, who was the Assistant Commissioner for Specialist Operations. We call that AXO as an abbreviation.
Right.
AXO was in place over the weekend, and it was transitioning to Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu.
In March, this is when you
In
say
March
the
of
weekend.
2018, sorry. In the weekend.
That particular weekend?
That particular weekend, sir, yes. You'll see there's a common pattern forming, sir, in relation to that weekend. Was quite significant in a number of leadership changes across the country. But, and then they had a handover period, so Sir Mark was still present during some of the first week of this operation, and while they transitioned to Assistant Commissioner Neil Basu.
And then you mentioned the Senior National Coordinator. Who was that in 2018?
So again, that had transitioned, so and was moving into on the Monday of the incident we first became involved to Deputy Assistant Commissioner Dean Hayden.
Thank you, because we shall see.
He's incoming or outgoing?
He's incoming.
Incoming.
Yeah, he was the commander of SO15 and then transitioned into this next role above the Senior National Coordinator.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's helpful because we will see the names reappearing in the documentation we're looking at. And how do CTP and MI5 share intelligence and operational updates?
So there are a number of different ways we do that, sir. But in 2018, if there's information or intelligence which might be relevant to a counter-terrorism or state threat investigation, we normally hold something called a JOT. That is an operational working level meeting called a joint operational team meeting. And in those JOTs, we will have a team leader from the security service and a senior investigating officer from the police. And we work together to share intelligence and information and assess the threat, harm and risk from that intelligence or information.
So do MI5 chair that meeting?
They do, yes.
But it's attended by counter-terrorism police. That's
Correct.
the joint operational team meeting.
Yes.
You described it as if it's two people, but I imagine it may sometimes be more than that.
It's substantially more than that, sir. So we tend to have experts from both our teams that then can help inform the assessment of the threat we see in that meeting.
Right.
And you refer in your statement to executive liaison group meetings. Is that another form of meeting that is for the purpose of liaison between the intelligence service of MI5 and CTP?
Yes, it is. So when there's a particularly challenging investigation or a high-risk investigation, or one that is likely to have a significant national or international impact, we can have something called an executive liaison group, an ELG. And that is a strategic level meeting chaired by the Senior National Coordinator for Counterterrorism. And through that meeting, they can provide oversight of the public safety risk, the threat, harm and risk, and monitor the investigation both from MI5 and policing's perspective. Very much a partnership meeting, again, with different attendees, sometimes from government, but mostly from the intelligence community and policing to respond to those incidents.
So two types of meetings, but that one's chaired by the Senior National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism Policing.
Yes.
Whereas the JOT is chaired by MI5.
Correct.
And does the JOT develop the ELG strategy?
It does, yes.
You've mentioned the difference between counter-terrorism police investigations and other investigations, and you've referred to counter-state threat investigations. Are those generally more complex than counter-terrorism investigations, the counter-state threat?
So they're more complex in how you handle information and you make decisions. But otherwise, the structures are very similar for how we operate. It's really who's entitled to see that information and what that information means to us in decision-making terms.
So one of the things is the need-to-know principle being
Absolutely.
applied in terms of handling information. And is that because of the enhanced capability and resources of states?
It is, absolutely. And in this case, when you're investigating terrorism, it's pretty unlikely that those terrorists will have capability to do some things that we know some states have to do to us as a country. So as a result, we have a very much more restricted sharing of intelligence in those investigations.
And you make the point in your witness statement that whereas there might not generally be the sort of general mass casualty you might see in a counter-terrorism situation, the compromise of information or sources might cause damage to national security that could lead to a loss of life.
Yes, that's correct. We have seen incidents that do, of course, directly lead to loss of life from state threat investigations in a similar way to counter-terrorism. But equally, the compromise of such sensitive intelligence can have a very significant impact, and it can lead to sometimes the loss of life if we're not cautious with how we handle that intelligence.
Well, bearing that in mind and referring to paragraph 23 of your witness statement, how is the threat to national security best counteracted?
I mean, it's really important, as we've learned in counter-terrorism over the years, and the model for policing has changed in this area so a lot as a result of learning, that we come together and work so closely with members of the intelligence community, sometimes, of course, our international and other partners, to ensure that we're sharing the required levels of information that allow us to make an assessment of that threat and, in turn, the response to that threat. So information sharing,
yes, being vitally important, and joint decision-making processes.
Extremely close collaboration that is part of that joint decision-making process that takes place in the JOT and to some extent in ELG.
And I'm not going to ask you for detail, but is it right to say that since 2018, some 6 years ago now, there have been significant developments in the joint working processes between CTP and the Security Service?
Yes, there has very significant developments.
Now, in a counter-terrorism or counter-state threat investigation, we've heard there'll be a senior investigating officer. What is their specific role?
So they are to lead the day-to-day activity within any kind of investigation. So we will frequently see on television a sort of, for example, a murder team investigation with a senior investigating officer that sits above it and directs the day-to-day conduct and strategy of that investigation. There's exactly the same role in counter-terrorism policing. An SIO will lead the day-to-day activity that takes place from a large investigation team. It just so happens in our world, obviously, we work closely with different partners than you might in other parts of policing.
So they're setting the strategic and tactical objectives of the investigation,
yep,
managing the day-to-day activities of officers and staff undertaking different roles in the investigation, and ensuring that the team works collaboratively with different agencies. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was the structure of oversight for the senior investigating officer?
So there are several different types of oversight. I've talked about the ELG, the Executive Liaison Group in CT, but one of the others is what we call a PIP4, so professionalising...
What?
A PIP4, so PIP4, which basically means the Professionalising Investigations Programme, which is a College of Policing programme. So it's about how we train and accredit our senior investigating officers. And a PIP4, so an SIO is referred to, sir, as a PIP3. So they've been through the college training to be an SIO. A PIP4 is that next level, a strategic senior investigating officer who can act as a guide to a senior investigating officer in a complex investigation, and also can remove some external influence over the SIO to allow them to run an investigation. So, for example, if there was a significant media presence in an investigation, that strategic SIO, the PIP4, can take the media away and be responsible for delivery of that media, allowing the SIO to focus on the important work to investigate the crime that's happened.
Yes, from what you're saying, the SIO is, as it were, the operational manager of the investigation. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Although they do take strategic leadership of it, sir, and it's only in really complex cases where we have a PIP4 where we feel that extra level of oversight and support is absolutely necessary.
So if I've just got the layers of supervision correct, we start with the PIP3, the senior investigating officer,
yes,
then the PIP4, who has senior oversight, but also links to other consequence management type issues like
yes,
media and the issues that we've heard with DCC Mills.
That's correct.
And then we have the senior national coordinator, and then the AXO at the top.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, and in the Salisbury and Amesbury poisonings, we've heard, if I perhaps start from the top and go down again, AXO, Charlie Rowley transferring to Neil Bazoo, the senior national coordinator transferring to DOC Hayden.
Correct.
The PIP4, who was that in Salisbury and Amesbury?
So this was a Detective Chief Superintendent from the South East Counter-Terrorism Unit at the time.
And can you tell us, you've talked about the importance of information sharing and collaboration, joint working. with which partners did counter-terrorism police liaise in the Salisbury and Amesbury investigations?
So there were a broad spread of partners obviously engaged in all of our responses to this, but clearly we worked with our intelligence community partners in the way that we normally would. But in addition to which, as you've heard from Mr Mills earlier today, we worked very closely within our counter-terrorism investigation with the SCG, and the response under him as gold for Wiltshire and, of course, consequence management to ensure that the scenes in Salisbury could be returned to normal at some point in the future.
And so how did you ensure information sharing between that parallel response? Was it just through the PIP4? Was there anybody else placed within the SCG or to liaise?
So initially, what would normally happen is the PIP4 acts as a conduit between the strategic coordination group you've heard about today and a counter-terrorism investigation. This was such a large and complex investigation that the decision was taken at a very early stage to deploy a detective superintendent into the SCG who could attend all of the SCG meetings and ensure that there was a two-way communication that existed between the SCG and the investigation. And I took a decision early in the investigation to also send in a forensic expert from SO15 to work in what you heard called the STAC earlier, the Scientific and Technical Advisory Cell. That was part of Mr Mills' response.
And was that Keith Asman?
No. It was an officer that would report to Keith Asman.
But Keith Asman was the forensic coordinator, is that
He was the forensic coordinator working on behalf of the senior investigating officer from the South East Counter-Terrorism Unit. I apologise. I know I appreciate it's so complex, so if you have any.
This is why we thought we'd have an introductory
Thank you.
session to explain the systems. And how frequent was liaison and collaboration with, for example, the SCG, other departments?
Well, so we would have attended either through the PIP4 or through our nominated superintendent every one of the SCG meetings. We did exchange information. You can understand perhaps having talked about what I've talked about, the challenges of need to know. Sometimes the information exchange from the investigation into SCG might have been slightly different in this case, but having those embedded officers allowed us to make sure that we were across what everybody was doing. So those would take place on an almost daily basis.
And did you liaise with government departments involved in health and science, such as DSTL and PHE?
So throughout this process, we had a very close liaison with DSTL. We were given nominated scientists to work with at DSTL to ensure that when we were taking investigative decisions, we had the science advice from an expert who understood what we were dealing with in Novichok as a
So just to be clear, as part of the evidential investigations, you had direct liaison with the STL, quite separately from the SCG and their scientific public health advice that they would be receiving from DSTL and PHE?
Yes, although there was clearly liaison between the two different teams within DSTL. So you'd have the DSTL reps attending SCG, DSTL reps supporting the investigation, both from the same agency, both understanding where we were headed. But it's important to say as well, we had relationships with Public Health England, who you heard Mr Mills mention earlier, in terms of those broader advisory notes. And as AXO, Mr Basu would attend COBRA meetings, or on occasion Mr Hayden would attend COBRA meetings, where of course SAGE were present and could be involved in those discussions.
And what about the emergency services and local authorities? How did that liaison, if any, work?
So if we had liaison with them directly, it was to do with specific things in relation to scenes, for example, or support that was needed in terms of consequence management. But the majority of that liaison took place within the Gold and SCG, in which we then worked closely with Mr Mills and his team to ensure that engagement took place.
And as a general point, we've heard from DCC Mills that the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley happened while investigations were still ongoing in relation to the Skripals, and there had already been a number of structures set up. And did that assist?
Yes, it did. So we were able, so for example, lots of our team had deployed within counter-terrorism policing terms at least, and in terms of Mr Mills's team, to both of those incidents. And so we were able to establish that reporting structure and also the specialist officers and staff that we would need to respond to these incidents much quicker in the second incident as a result of what we had learned from the first incident.
And finally, on the point of liaison with different agencies, you say in your witness statement, and this is paragraph 76, that support for the Salisbury investigation was offered by the National Crime Agency, the NCA, and from the FBI, the Federal Bureau for Investigation in the States, but that wasn't needed because CTP had sufficient resources and skills. Is that correct?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. We clearly remained very close in liaison terms with both those agencies, but yes, we did not require resources from them to help us.
And that was in relation to Salisbury. What about Amesbury?
I'm not aware of them ever offering in Amesbury, but again, the same applied, really. The same resources that we had in Salisbury were sufficient to deal with the investigation in Amesbury.
We've heard from DCC Mills about the Wiltshire Police response operations to Salisbury and Amesbury, Fairline and Fortis. Could you give us an overview of the CT police operations with Dana, Caterva and Reed, please?
I can. So
29 to 34 is your witness statement if you need to refer to it.
Thank you. So the first operation you mentioned is Operation Wadana. This was the operation name given to counter-terrorism policing southeast investigation into Sergei and Yulia Skripal's poisoning here in Salisbury. That was a reactive investigation, so an investigation that focuses on responding to crime scenes and victims, speaking to witnesses, checking CCTV, trying to gather as much evidence to identify what happened and where it might have happened. There was a second operation, and my role in that one, as I mentioned earlier, was to support the SIO, Detective Superintendent from the South East Counterterrorism Unit, as a critical friend, and ensure that the support was provided to that senior investigating officer. The second operation is Operation Caterva. These two operations ran in parallel. Caterva was the operation for which I was the senior investigating officer. This is a covert investigation that seeks to identify those responsible for this incident, in this case, on the basis of the charges Petrov, Bosharov and Fedotov, and work with partners to understand that in a covert sense, how we use intelligence and information to inform our investigation and then conduct an evidence-based inquiry. So that's Wadana is the response to the incident, Caterva is the covert operation into the suspects, and then as soon as CT policing became aware of the cause of Dawn and Charlie's poisoning, clearly we started Operation Reed, which was under a different senior investigating officer, again from the South East, DCI Murphy, and it was really important that that investigation was led by a separate individual to ensure the conduct of the investigation wasn't dissuaded by some other activity that we'd already undertaken. So we'd like to see that independent SIO take responsibility.
We're going to hear more about that from you tomorrow.
Great.
So although it was a separate SIO giving that element of independence, did you liaise quite closely between your role as the SIO for Caterva and Operation Reed?
Yes, in effect you have the Detective Superintendent of Wadana, me as the SIO for Caterva, and the DCI who was the SIO for Operation Reed, constantly speaking to each other, attending the same meetings, the same JOTs, and sharing information.
So I'm going to just recap that because it is the first time we're sort of going into the detail of those three investigations, which are obviously of critical importance to this inquiry. So with Dana, we have the reactive investigation to the Skripals.
Yes.
For which your role is a critical friend to the SIO.
Yes.
And that's incident-led, so focusing on gathering all the evidence, door-to-door inquiries, scene searches, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Caterva, the parallel investigation into the suspects for which you're the SIO, is a proactive investigation led by intelligence, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And that's the one in which you particularly work with intelligence partners.
Yes.
And then we have Operation Reed, which is another reactive investigation to Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley's poisoning.
Yes, correct.
For which we've heard that the SIO was DCI Murphy, but with whom you liaised, as did the SIO for Wadana.
Yes, important to say, the same PIP 4 sat above all three of those operations as well. So in order to ensure that coordination, the Chief Superintendent from the South East Counterterrorism Unit acted as pitfall across all 3 investigations.
Thank you. That brings us on now to asking you about the scale and complexity of these investigations. Perhaps you could indicate, and you deal with it at paragraphs 33 and 34, the factors that made this particularly challenging.
Well, so this was the first identified use of a chemical weapon in the UK in this case, in this sense, used as a tool, we say, to conduct an assassination in this style. Having worked on the Litvinenko investigation, I understood quite quickly how significant this would be and how completely challenging it would be. So from even our scene investigations through to how we would work with partners to understand who might be responsible for it, the scale of the incident, the impact on the public of Salisbury. This really was an unprecedented investigation, not one that we had seen before, but one that we were able to apply our existing operational processes to in order to respond.
Because the impacts were multiple, weren't they?
So not just on Salisbury, but there was very significant impact on international relations there as well. You will have seen, and I'm sure we will discuss further, the impact on decisions taken by other governments and the impact that using a chemical weapon has on the streets of anywhere in any country amongst our allies as well. But of course, more broadly, you saw the impact in Salisbury. The world's media were here all of the time, reporting everyday activity that was taking place here. And on top of that, clearly there was a very large coordinated response on behalf of Her Majesty's government at the time. And in addition to that, clearly we had the Russian state commenting in the media, but also making inquiries of us on a regular basis.
So particular challenges conducting an investigation where there's involvement suspected of a hostile state. You've mentioned the media. It's important, isn't it, for the police to be operationally independent?
It's extremely important, yes. We must be able to work without that external influence, unless, of course, that influence is helpful to our investigation. So, yes, what we sort of guard our operational independence very closely in incidents like this, where we will listen to what's happening in the world. We'll listen absolutely to the challenges that are happening, but we need to focus on the evidence that's in front of us, the information available to us that helps inform our prioritisation of actions in an investigation.
And you've mentioned the broader impacts, of course, on the people of Salisbury and Amesbury and the country more broadly, but also there were individual impacts, weren't there, of course, on those contaminated and very tragically in Dawn Sturgess's case, the fatal impact.
Absolutely.
And was there also a twin focus on protecting the public from harm as well as trying to find those responsible and trying to achieve justice?
This was an overriding principle of all of our investigations, actually, is how do we identify the ongoing risk to the public, even in those early stages in the first incident here in Salisbury, and take steps to make sure that while we gather evidence that's important to our criminal investigation, and we're doing that with a primary focus on what does it mean to public health, what does it mean to the health of officers and staff who are deploying into these really challenging, contaminated scenes on a daily basis. So the safety and well-being of the public and our officers and staff were paramount throughout our investigation.
And I think we'll hear more about, particularly when you're dealing with a nerve agent, the practical implications that had for officers who were searching and investigating,
yes,
seeking evidence. One of the questions the family of Dawn Sturgess, those poisoned by the Novichok, the people of Salisbury and the wider public will of course ask is, was MI5 involved in the investigations? And you've already in your evidence indicated that counter-terrorism policing works closely with MI5, particularly through ELGs and JOTs, and that they in turn work with MI6 and GCHQ. So I'd now like to adduce, if I may please, through Commander Murphy, a witness statement which has been provided by MI5 to the inquiry. If we could have that up on screen, please. It's INQ 006055. This is a 4-page witness statement of MD 39, who is a senior officer within the security service, dated the 2nd of October. The witness starts at paragraph 2 by offering condolences, both on my own behalf and on behalf of MI5 to Ms Sturgess's family, and to all those who have been otherwise affected by the awful events in 2018. Introducing themselves at paragraph 3, the witness explains they've worked for MI5 since 1999. They say, I am currently a senior leader within MI5's counter-state threats branch, and that they've undertaken a wide variety of roles, including in working in counterintelligence and counter-terrorism investigations and operations. In the same paragraph, MD 39 says they were not involved in the events, but the witness is well placed to provide the statement on behalf of MI5, given their current and previous roles and my previous experience of functions and operation of MI5 generally. At paragraph 4, MD 39 confirms that the purpose of the statement is to address the nature and extent of MI5's investigation into the poisoning of Sergei and Yulia Skripal, and latterly Ms Sturgess, and its liaison with the parallel police investigations. As I addressed with you in relation to your own evidence, Commander Murphy, MD 39 says at paragraph 5 that they have sought to be as transparent as possible, but I must emphasise at the outset that there remains a level of detail that I cannot address without risking serious harm to national security. And MD 39 in that paragraph goes on to explain the reasons for that. Commander Murphy, is that a balance that you well understand?
Yes, absolutely.
Paragraph 7, MD 39, confirms, however, that MI5 has made available to the Chair and his legal team everything they've sought to review, and that the inquiry will therefore be able to investigate all the matters it covers in closed where it cannot do so in open. At paragraphs 8 to 11, MI5 sets out its legal powers and remit, which includes the protection of national security, and in particular its protection against threats from espionage, terrorism and sabotage from the activities of agents of foreign powers. And at paragraph 10, MD 39 explains that MI5's history of effort against the Russian Federation and former Soviet Union means it has built and maintained significant experience in the investigation of the activities of the Russian state today. Commander Murphy, I'd like you to confirm for us your understanding and experience of what's set out at paragraph 11 in terms of the division of powers and roles as between MI5 and the police.
Yes, thank you. So in paragraph 11, the witness refers to MI5 not having powers of arrest, for example. How it tends to work in reality is that in the intelligence phase of an operation, so it will be MI5 led, and then as we transition into disrupting some activity, it will become police led and supported by MI5. That transition is largely what's being referred to here by the witness, where they work closely with other law enforcement partners to ensure that once there's a need for action based upon that intelligence, they know who to come to see that action.
So for members of the public particularly who may not be familiar with the respective powers, the police have powers of arrest.
Yes.
And conduct criminal investigations with a view to prosecution.
Yes.
MI5 provides police and law enforcement with information and intelligence assessments on threats, but each collaborates with the other on investigations that may result in criminal proceedings. Does that
Absolutely
summarise
correct.
it?
Yes.
Moving on to section C of the statement, MI5's investigation. At paragraph 13, MI5 confirms MI5 carried out a full investigation into the incident in Salisbury and those within the Russian intelligence services responsible for it. Although the police and MI5 have distinct roles and responsibilities, MI5 works together with the police to achieve the objectives of a post-incident investigation. This partnership model was adopted for the post-incident investigation into the events in Salisbury, and then after Ms Sturgess tragically fell ill and died, the same model was adopted. Commander Murphy, can you confirm that there was indeed a covert investigation from your knowledge?
I can, yes.
And at paragraph 14, MD 39 gives slightly more information about what the police did and what MI5 did in this particular case. The police led on ensuring public safety, the prevention of further attacks, evidence gathering to support executive action, and ensuring public confidence and reassurance, including delivering public communications in relation to the incident. Do you agree with that?
Yes, that's correct.
MI5 led on the gathering and exploitation, assessment and dissemination of intelligence to support the post-incident investigation. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so does that sum up the partnership model and the respective roles and responsibilities that you experienced during the investigations into these events?
Thank you. Yes, it does.
At the end of paragraph 14, MD 39 indicated that while a large proportion of the investigation involved covert activities and collection of intelligence, some simultaneous overt activities were conducted by the police, including large-scale CCTV retrieval and public appeals for assistance. Again, is that right?
Yes, that's right. In essence, that is us sharing information from our investigative activity back with MI5 to ensure that we've got that two-way sharing to make joint assessments of what we do next.
Thank you. And that brings me to my final point about police techniques and evidential sources. Your witness statement contains reference to a very large number of techniques and evidential sources which appear to have been exploited by the police in the investigations. I'm going to list them and then ask you to confirm whether that list properly represents the range of police techniques that were considered or deployed and the evidential sources that were used in the investigations. So you refer to house-to-house inquiries.
Where are you, please, Ms. White?
In fact, because I am all over the statement,
all right, no, that's fine.
I'm going to list the types of inquiries and evidential sources.
In that case,
and no doubt Commander Murphy will let me know if I've missed any or if any are incorrect. So house-to-house inquiries. But so I do have some paragraph references for your reference. I'll just indicate as we go. Is 103. Scene searches and forensic investigations.
Yes.
Building victim profiles, so paragraph 36. Reviewing digital devices, paragraph 38. Police interviews with victims, paragraph 103.
Correct.
Sorry, what was the last one?
Police interviews with victims.
Oh, yes, right.
103. Developing working hypotheses.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the development of sequence of events and timelines through scene investigations.
Absolutely.
So paragraphs 63 to 66. Witness interviews. Communications data.
Yes.
Police intelligence. The last three, so are paragraphs 63 to 66. CCTV, paragraph 84. Yes. Outside inquiries, for example, financial investigations and witness trawls.
Correct.
That's paragraph 84. Automatic number plate recognition inquiries, paragraph 90. Reviewing information from other police forces, officers, Wiltshire Police in this case. Sampling, paragraph 90.
Yep.
CBRN policing techniques.
Correct.
Paragraph 101. Wi-Fi checks and cell site data, paragraph 103. Conventional biometric swabbing fingerprints, and in the context you describe it at paragraph 122, you say that was considered.
Yes.
So are there times when those biometrics actually are not suitable?
Yes, absolutely. For example, depending upon the circumstances of each individual scene, it may be not appropriate to take fingerprints and DNA from those scenes.
Scene walkthroughs, paragraph 125 to 126.
Correct.
And media articles, paragraph 199.
Yes.
And does that properly represent the sort of range of policing techniques that were considered or deployed and the evidential sources?
Just on that last point, I think on media articles it's much broader than that as well. Clearly it is all material that might be posted open source that may well provide some useful information to us. So
that's researching open source material?
Absolutely, sir. Not just media, but more broadly.
In other words, you can look up online just the same as anybody else can?
Exactly.
Right.
And presumably when there's open source media research, police would also seek to establish in parallel other evidential support for anything they might find in open.
Yes, absolutely, yes. I mean, these things posted online are sometimes not the strength of evidence that we would like to see. So, of course, we parallel everything in an investigative sense.
Yeah.
And on that note, was disinformation something that had to be taken into consideration, particularly in this case?
Yes.
Can you just explain that?
So there was an awful lot of information posted online, but also there were a number of journalistic and other agencies out there that were conducting their own inquiries and investigations, so huge amounts of information online. And some of that obviously was reviewed by us so that we could understand whether or not it provided us with an investigative opportunity that we might explore further.
Thank you, Commander Murphy. That concludes my questioning for this tranche of evidence. As we've said, you're due to return tomorrow to address Operation Reed, the investigation into the poisoning of Dawn Sturgess and Charlie Rowley that you've described.
Yes.
So it is a shorter day today, but we have extremely full days for the rest of the week. So it may be that all of the teams and you so yourself will find it useful to have some time for discussions and to undertake further preparatory work.
I think even I understand that there's a good deal of work done outside the courtroom, Ms. Whitelaw. Mr. Murphy, I gather you're going to be coming back from time to time to, as it were, deal with particular compartments of evidence. Please feel free to go now. If you need to confer with counsel in relation to evidence which is yet to come, please feel free to do that.
Thanks, sir.
But not, please, as it were, to rehash what you've just told us. What you've just told us stands as your evidence.
Sir, thank you.
All right? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, Miss Whitelaw, 10 o'clock tomorrow morning?
Thank you.
10 o'clock tomorrow morning.